Is the challenge more to take that away, or for you guys to have to make more to kind of keep up, knowing that they're going to make at least some?
I mean, obviously, I think they're the best three-point shooting team in the NBA. So sometimes really hard to take those away, especially when they have five guys out. They can all shoot. So obviously, we got to make more. We didn't make enough shots today to beat them, but we got to be better on both ends.
On today's episode of Inside the Mavs, how do the Mavericks adjust going into game number 2 after their game 1 blowout loss in the NBA Finals to the Boston Celtics? This is Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining us here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel like Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video as well. Got to get you ready for game 2 of the NBA Finals with a look back at game 1 and the adjustments that the Mavericks got to make going into game 2 to try to earn a split in Boston. Joining me on the episode, Grant Afseth of Mavs Sports Illustrated, covering the Dallas Mavericks in Boston, getting ready for game 2 of the NBA Finals. Grant, what's going on?
Not much. Definitely looking forward to discussing that game 1. Always interesting to see how a team can respond from a game 1, and it's like what a lot of people say about the playoffs. Sometimes the reaction is the team that loses, people think they're never going to win again. Some people think the team that wins is always going to win. Like I remember hearing some media people at the finals saying, "I'm not saying the series is over." Like had to start their sentences. So I'm just like, geez, like these narratives are always interesting.
Well, game 1 was definitely over a lot earlier than what Mavericks fans, I'm sure, were expecting going into this NBA Finals. Of course, the Celtics winning game 1 by 18, 107-89. Kristaps Porzingis coming off the bench with 20 points for the Celtics. But, I mean, Grant, honestly, before we get into anything specific from game 1 as we look forward to game 2, I mean, this is kind of what the Mavericks do. They're now 1-6 in the Jason Kidd era in game 1s in the postseason. But at the same time, a couple of things that Mavericks fans can take solace in is the fact that the Mavs have not lost back-to-back games since March the 5th, and they've won every game 2 of this postseason so far. So maybe the Mavericks have the Celtics right where they want them after losing game 1 in that way, but I'm sure not in the fashion that they wanted to see that happen, win or lose based off of what we saw in game 1 in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think going down by 29, obviously never a positive, but managing to get that down to 8 at one point. Jason Kidd pretty frequently mentioned that travel that, Derek Lively had after that offensive rebound as basically alluding to as a momentum killer, which, proved to be the case with them, trailing by 20 again before the third quarter even ended. That was just how, impressive the Celtics were in this game. But, I think, going into a game 1, usually you're going to see a lot of the base approaches from both teams. And then you feel out like how, that looks and things of that nature. Boston has to feel, very good about what their base identity looks like. And now for Dallas, they have to try to find ways to get them out of that identity. And, with them often, switching and not doubling or blitzing against, Luka Doncic or Kyrie Irving, that it's hard to get the defense out of rotation and create quality looks for, especially the bigs with the cross matching that Boston likes to do. There was 0 roll man points, which is pretty alarming for a pick and roll oriented team. And then, the corner 3 volume was extremely low. That tells you they're willing to live with above the break shots for guys like PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr. And before the series started, we talked about how that's probably going to be the case, and they're going to have to take advantage of those opportunities. I thought they didn't play fast enough, but also, as we talked about for the series, it's harder to play faster when you're taking the ball out of the net as opposed to forcing turnovers, closing possessions with missed shots, and especially when you're giving up second and third chance opportunities, especially early in that game. There was a lot of long misses that they did not corral at all. So definitely a lot of things to clean up going into that game too. But as you said, that history of bouncing back from game ones and losses in general, they're going to have to lean into that to avoid falling down 2-0 in the series.
Yeah, because this is a Boston team that's played to their strengths in game one in a lot of ways. I mean, you saw it, especially in the first quarter. The Mavericks, I thought, were a little shell-shocked by the way that the Celtics came out. I mean, Kristaps Porzingis gave them a massive lift off the bench. I mean, the Celtics went on what was a 25-7 run to close the final 7 minutes of that first quarter to lead by 17 at the end of one. They went 7 of 15 from downtown. And here's the thing, for folks that were watching the game or may not have known it, the Celtics set an NBA Finals record with 7 guys making at least 2 3-pointers in game one. That had never been done before. And it just kind of gives you an idea of the amount of guys that can take and make threes for this team. That 7 different dudes had at least 2 3-pointers made in the game, whether it was Sam Hauser, whether it was Kristaps Porzingis. Derek White hit some back-breaking threes in that first quarter as well. It was just a barrage of threes. But you're right, the Mavericks didn't play fast enough. But as you mentioned, you can't play with pace when you're constantly getting the ball out of the basket. And we saw in that first quarter, the Celtics really take it to them. And I was really surprised at the fact that, I mean, Luka Doncic, really played well for the most part in this game. Really kind of felt like the only one that wasn't too, overwhelmed by the moment, if you will, in game one. For everyone else, especially in that first quarter, and we were talking about it before we got on the show, the very first play of the game, Daniel Gafford goes for a pump fake in the right corner on an Al Horford 3-pointer, and next Horford's driving to the basket for a dunk, and you're thinking, okay, y'all got to calm down a little bit. It's okay. Obviously, it's a big atmosphere. The Celtics fans are right there, loud, but you got to stay disciplined. And I thought that from the very outset kind of gave you indication like, okay, the Mavericks might need to figure out a way to slow some things down. They just couldn't figure out a way to get out of their own way in game one, especially in that first quarter there.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was a great example. And then also throughout the game, there were times where, some players were hesitant to let it fly, from the perimeter. And against a team like Boston, when you have an opportunity to shoot it, you have to.
Yes.
So their whole goal, which is the goal of any team, but they're just more capable of doing it than any other team, is to not get out of rotation. If you have that window of opportunity, that has to happen, getting that shot up. And then, I just thought, defensively as well, too, it seemed like they were a step slow throughout the night. It felt like Boston was far more aware of what Dallas was trying to get into, while Boston's read and react, offense just getting the ball to pop around, taking advantage of size mismatches, playing off of that. It just seemed like they were more prepared to handle, Dallas's approach. Aside from the third quarter, early period, they got really stagnant and struggled to score and get into the paint during that period. But just the way they started things off, I think they trusted their identity very well. Like, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis, they were in the middle of the floor, hunting smaller players at times. And then Jaylen Brown was, complete spark plug, setting the tone on both ends. He ripped the ball from Luka numerous times for dunks. He was, he had some dynamic defensive plays. If I remember correctly, I think he had 3 steals and blocks. There was like a low man rotation he had where he just like completely erased Derek Jones' dunk. And I thought some of those attempts by the Mavs, I thought they were, a little, the spotlight might be a little, take to get used to at this point. Yeah. I thought Derek Jones getting blocked 4 times, that was pretty, that was a high number. That's kind of a sign of you're pressing a little bit. Jaden Hardy, Josh Green had some, fast breaks where they, they just had really tough. Josh Green, not as much. I mean, trying to dunk it, you got to do what you got to do in that situation. He just got blocked. But Jaden Hardy, I thought at times tried to do a little bit too much, and I just thought overall that compounded where you can't have too many new to the moment players in the circumstance. While Boston is familiar with that territory, there'll still naturally be nerves. As Jason Tatum mentioned, he was even nervous for the game, but that's a little different set of nerves when you've already been at the moment, and it's more about, all right, we've been here before, and we have to take advantage of this chance. I thought Boston just took advantage of that and used it as fuel. Like Jaylen Brown, as I mentioned, with the spark plug for them, he just set the tone, and I think that really propelled him. Like he was amped up for every play that he made, his teammates made, and I thought that was just a different mentality than what the Mavericks kind of showed.
Yeah, and you could tell at different points of the game the Mavericks were trying to get themselves back in it. We'll dive more into that, especially in what was an 11.5-minute stretch between the end of the first half and into the third quarter, where the Mavericks were able to turn things around to make this a game in game one. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, and let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs, thank you for hanging out with us to that spot, and thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast in Aura, as we recap game number one and get you ready for game number two of the NBA Finals between the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics. The Mavericks losing by 18 in game number one, and we were talking about obviously some of the things that the Mavericks struggled with in game one, and there was a sequence late in that first quarter, and Kristaps Porzingis, we knew that he was going to be able to be available for game one, but I don't think we had an idea that he was going to have the kind of dramatic impact that he had, especially in that first quarter with the 11 points. At one point, Porzingis hits a three. He gets a block on a Josh Green dunk attempt in transition. Sam Hauser hits a three in the right corner, and then Porzingis has another block on the next possession defensively, and he really put his stamp on this game and really took advantage of some mismatches, whether it be, getting threes in the top of the key, whether it be at the elbow, whether it be in the mid post. Like, he was taking advantage of all the matchups that were there and making a variety of shots, even taking the ball off the dribble and taking it to the basket for, a dunk. Like, he showed his full versatile game and was really effective for the Celtics. Were you surprised at how effective he was immediately coming off the bench for the Celtics in that way?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting decision, a smart one for Boston to bring him off the bench. Derek Lively had been a massive, positive for Dallas throughout their postseason run, especially with him playing often against bench units. And I think having a talent like Porzingis helps neutralize that advantage, along with the schemes, obviously, that they're playing, because they're cross-matching a lot. So that takes away a lot of what Derek, tends to benefit from offensively. I just thought with offensively from Porzingis, everything that you said, definitely having all of that click at once was, fascinating. I thought, he really relished in the support that he got. There was a video that they were playing on the board, he wasn't on the court when the rest of the Celtics were warming up, like in the pregame warm up, and he was walking up the hall, like out of the training room. They're showing him the whole time walking out of the tunnel, and that arena was so loud for him. They were like super anticipating him playing, and he actually had mentioned after the game that he used that as motivation. Like that was such a special reception for them being that excited for him to come back, that he basically that was a helpful factor in him setting that tone early. And I thought everything that you mentioned, like the size mismatches, he just shot over even PJ Washington.
Yes.
Like there's just nothing you can do in that situation. I mean, those are tough shots to live with.
And he was hitting tough shots, yeah.
Yeah. So, whether that continues to happen throughout the course of the series remains to be seen. But definitely, it's kind of reminds me when he was with the Mavericks. There's times where everything's clicking for him, and you just look like you see a team that's ready to set the NBA on fire. Yes. Like at the time, they had the best offensive rating in NBA history with Luka and Porzingis, and there's times where Porzingis is just spraying threes, blocking shots, catching lobs, getting to the rim. Luka's doing what Luka does, and then you're like, this team looks like they'll never lose again. and then threes don't fall the next game on a like at the time Mavericks were a heavy 3-point reliant team, and that kind of went back down to earth at times. So that Boston is more talented than those Mavericks teams. So if threes don't fall, it doesn't mean to say that they're automatically going to lose by any stretch. But that's kind of the way a playoff series can go sometimes. One team just lasers tons of threes. A lot of things click for them. Tough shots fall. Kind of reminds me of how Dallas closed out the Timberwolves. People were talking about, one of the best backcourt ever, best talent or most talented offensive backcourt ever. Like you just start having those conversations when guys score like 35 plus. They look unbeatable. And then all of a sudden, Kyrie Irving is scoring 12 points, 6 of 19 from the floor, 0 for 5 from 3 in game 1 of the NBA Finals. And then now we're like, Kyrie Irving needs to be better in game 2. So there's just a lot of, don't get too high, don't get too low if you're a team in the playoffs, because it can flip in a lot of different directions very quickly.
Yeah, I was surprised at how many people were jumping on my timeline and just on Twitter in general saying, where was this Kristaps Porzingis in Dallas? I'm like, y'all must have not been paying attention at times, because there were plenty of times when that version of Kristaps Porzingis showed up for Dallas. And I remember many a game where Porzingis was out here, like you said, bombing away from the 3-point line. There were plenty. Yes, I know that Porzingis dealt with his fair share, of injuries at times with the Mavericks, but there were some points where you could see the offensive music that Porzingis and Doncic were making together, and you were thinking, man, that's the kind of stretch five that, the league is kind of looking at. And there's a reason why he's kind of referred to as a unicorn, because of his ability to shoot from 3 and be able to put the ball on the floor. But then on the other end, block shots the way that he did. And he was tremendous, in game 1. But there was two stretches for the Mavericks in game 1 that I think if you're a Mavericks fan, you could take a little bit of confidence in, because it kind of gave us a window into maybe this is how the Mavericks can be able to start to get themselves into the series. And in the final 4 minutes of the second quarter of the first half, they went on a 13-5 run. Doncic hit a 3-pointer with 9 seconds left to cut the lead down to what was 21 going into the second half. So you felt like, okay, they saw some positive things start to happen in the final 4 minutes of the first half. Then they open up the first 7.5 minutes of the third quarter on a 22-9 run to cut the lead from what was to 21 down to 8. And you felt like, and again, Luka Doncic hitting a 3-pointer to be able to get them down to that 8-point deficit. And at that point, you had worked your way back into the game. Boston, I believe, started 1 of 6 or 1 of 7 from 3 in that third quarter. And the Mavericks started to lock down defensively, and they were finally starting to get some things going with Luka and Kyrie to an extent to really get themselves back into the game. But as you mentioned a little bit earlier, this game was full of runs, and as soon as you felt like the Mavericks were able to get that momentum, get it down to single digits, which they had been fighting to get to, Boston rips off a 14-0 run, capped off by a Jaylen Brown 3-pointer, and next thing you know, they're back up by 22 before you can blink, and it's just like, this is the kind of thing that you got to be able to sustain. And I thought the Mavericks had a chance to really get themselves in it. You talked about, the sequence where you had the travel that kind of killed the momentum. What did you see in those two stretches, in that 13-5 run to close the first half, and then that 22-9 start in the third quarter, that the Mavericks can take with them a little bit going into game two based off of what they did successfully in those two parts of the game there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it did rely on Boston missing threes. I think during the third quarter they started to be more willing to live with the big switching and trying to hold a zone, which that was something that did come at a cost because Derek Lively fouled like crazy doing
Yes.
that. So I think in concept, if you can keep them a little bit more off of the 3-point line in terms of clean looks while also protecting the paint by being willing to switch and hold your own, like by not fouling as much next game, that's something that can kind of be thought of. I think a lot of times kind of going back to that feel out game, or you could go into a game one with your base strategies. I think Dallas doesn't necessarily, as any team would, want to show too many of their cards from the start of a series. So I think they started to mix it up more after halftime, as they've done in previous series. So I think just getting a little more creative, maybe go with a little bit of a matchup zone, but you have to be able to get that energy from everyone on the floor defensively. And I thought, for as much as Luka was effective offensively with 30 points and adding 10 rebounds, I thought he was really taxed by the Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, Derek White, all those defenders really pressing him and being physical and taking stabs at the ball all night, that like there were some rotations that he didn't necessarily make, as well as other members of the team, that I think you're going to have to find that balance of perhaps Kyrie Irving is going to have to initiate more. I think we've had this discussion at times in the playoffs, in other series too, where I think kind of the defense is going to have to benefit from the offense taking pressure off Luka, let him kind of respond like he did in that Clippers series, where we were talking about defensive letdowns in game one of that series. And then all of a sudden he got hunted like crazy later on, and he sat down, guarded, and held his own. And I think that's going to have to be where Kyrie Irving is going to have to help out Luka, where maybe he initiates more, maybe the offense just gets more creative in their approach. But I think the Mavericks should probably learn a little bit from the Celtics approach. I think they need to get Luka more touches in the middle of the floor with spacing, because they had a lot of size mismatches that they just thrived on with Porzingis and Tatum and Jaylen Brown. A lot of players in general, they were good about finding favorable spots, where I think Luka, playing a little bit more off ball, moving him around the half court, regardless of how they do it, I think they're going to have to try. But I think also this is the team where that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, versus saying, like, it's easy for me to say that and not show my work, if you will. Because I remember during the World Cup, they experimented with Luka on the Slovenian national team a little bit, where he was playing off of like zoom action handoffs out of the corner, pin downs, all that stuff. But they kind of went away from it at times, because when you face a team that's really physical and is going to be very aggressive, you can't get into those actions as well, because they just simply blow them up. And there's going to be less contact foul calls in FIBA versus the NBA. So maybe
and in game one, the referees kind of let them go a little bit. Like there wasn't a lot of foul calls. They kind of let them play and have their way from a physical standpoint, which I was kind of surprised by, that the game wasn't called a little bit tight. I think Luka was too, because there was plenty of times. I mean, it's not like he doesn't do that anyway, but there was plenty of times where he was looking for foul calls that didn't come, but the referees were letting them play in game one for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I think you're going to have to obviously play through that going forward, but also maybe just feel it out, like where maybe you run them off a pin down, or get them that handoff out of that zoom action, and maybe draw a foul out of it, depending on the style of the real superstars in the NBA, the officiating crew. That might be for some of the playoffs. That seems to be one of the matchups that you got to watch.
Yes.
But
who are the three officials on the floor? Yes.
Oh, for sure. I think in general, they're going to have to probably turn to some of their other approaches that they've used in the past as well too. Like they're going to have to use more double drag screens, try to bring one of the smaller guards into the action and get more aggressive hunting that. Drew Holiday can hold his own. Derek White can as well, but I like that more than Jaylen Brown just guarding his ass off against Luka with his size and his length, athleticism, all that stuff. So I think that's definitely, something they're going to have to do. I think that's happened in previous playoff series as well, too, where they've had to turn to that more, especially against Minnesota, where they looked a little stagnant at times. I think in that loss, really, because that was a great series from them overall. Mm-hmm. But, other matchups as well, too, where I think Oklahoma City was one in particular where they had to get more creative because Kyrie Irving was neutralized by doubles and all of the, like in some of those games, scoring multiple times in single figures. So, yeah, definitely this is going to be a real test for, the coaching staff, the creativity of them as well, because you're not only having to deal with just creating good shots, you have a math problem that you have to solve for, too, that Boston poses for any team that's playing them since they get up so many threes. And I know people don't like to hear that because they start to say, oh, he's going to talk about Excel spreadsheets with me, and that's not real basketball. But, I think there is a very real, situation on the court when it happens because, as you said, that stretch where they lasered like 3 straight threes and made defensive plays with Porzingis on blocks and things of that nature. That just became daunting and overwhelming to the point where you're like, wow, they are already down 21 points or whatever it was, or
in a hurry,
whatever. Yeah, it was very fast. And as Kyrie Irving likes to, frequently mention, the start of a game is super important because that really ties into how you manage the rest of the game. And that's kind of why them even getting it down to 8, I think, that naturally, is a positive to look into, but also, I mean, the fact that they had to come back from 29, they had no margin for error left at all. They had to be perfect the rest of the game. And that's a lot of game left to be played to have to be perfect to the point where they had to put reserves in even after cutting it down to 8. So, definitely a lot to, kind of think about going into that next game. But, definitely going to have to take pressure off of Luka, I think, offensively to get more out of him defensively because naturally that's a lot of burden. Taking like how many shots did he take? 26?
He wound up taking in game 1, 26 shots, went 12 of 26,
because that takes a lot of effort when you're mostly breaking down a really good defender out in space. Mm-hmm. And then also
trying to split double teams. He did that on one basket. Like it was, and he had to finish tough at the rim after splitting the double team. Like it was just some real tough shots that he had to make at times in that game.
Yeah, exactly. So like naturally there's going to be limitations to the defensive impact someone provides in that context. So they're going to have to find ways to make it easier for him. And that'll definitely be a factor because it trickles through a large, segment of the game, throughout the rest of the night overall.
4 numbers that stood out to me in game 1 that've got to change in game 2. Number 1 is the number 1 actually, which was the amount of assists that Luka Doncic had. That is unheard of for him. And Boston's calculus for me as watching the game and going back and watching it, a little bit over again is the calculus was for them is like, look, go ahead, Luka, go ahead and do what you do. If you score 30, 35, that's fine. None of the rest of these other guys are going to beat us. We're going to stay home on PJ. We're going to stay home on Derrick Jones Jr. We're going to switch when we need to, but we're not letting all these other guys beat you because they only took and attempted 2 corner threes in game 1 as well. So they limited the corner threes. Luka Doncic only had 1 assist, but the other 3 numbers that stood out to me, 2 of them are the same number actually. The number 9, which was the total amount of assists that the Mavericks had in game 1. And the Celtics had 9 blocks in game 1. Like the defensive effort that Boston had, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, Jaylen Brown, probably the sequence of the game outside of that Porzingis one we talked about, he blocks, an attempted lob attempt for Derrick Jones Jr. Then on the same possession, blocks a dunk attempt at the rim by Derrick Jones Jr. You're talking about the 4 blocks, that he had on him, in game 1. That individual effort by Jaylen Brown was sensational throughout the course of the game. He had a pickpocket of Luka that led to a dunk on the other end. He was flying around the court. And also, for me, Brown was the one that stopped that when they cut it down to 8 and they were eventually able to get it back up to 22. It wasn't Jason Tatum. It wasn't Porzingis. It was Jaylen Brown that said, look, this is not going to happen. We're going to push this lead back up, to 22. And that's what it became. I thought Jaylen Brown was sensational in game number 1. And the other number I'll say real quick, is 27. The Celtics were a plus 27 from the 3-point line in game 1 against the Mavericks. You're not going to win any games when you're shooting, if you're the Mavericks, 7 of 27 from 3 at 26%, while the Celtics go 16 of 42, scoring 48 points from the 3-point line. That's not going to work, especially for a team that gets up as many threes as they do. In fact, Boston put up 42 threes in game 1. They did exactly that whole math game that we were talking about going into the series, that if they did it and did it well, the Mavericks could be in trouble, and that's exactly what Boston did. But those numbers for me told me a lot about game 1 and the lack of ball movement that we saw from the Mavericks, simply because Boston made the calculus that, hey, Luke can go get his, but then none of the rest of these guys are going to get theirs based off of what they are able to do and how they affect the game, whether it be knocking down threes or in the lob in the vertical game. Yeah, the Celtics just weren't having it in game 1.
Yeah, definitely, because that basically takes away the finisher, like the bigs, that takes them out, and they have been some of the most efficient, just scorers in general, with their, catch and finish opportunities on pick and roll and just drop off passes. So that takes away a big part of their offense. And then the corner threes, as you mentioned as well too, that's the other, hot spot zone that, Luka likes to, spray it out to. So overall, that's two fundamental elements of the offense that are neutralized. And I thought they did a great job of containing Kyrie Irving as well too. They really got him off the 3-point line, and they funneled him into tough, short range, shot creation sequences where he was, really having to be acrobatic in the air. Sometimes he had clean ones, so it's not like they're Fort Knox like the whole night. But he also had some tough finish attempts where he had to play against contact, missed the finish, and I just thought they did a great job. When people talk about making it life tough on a star player, I thought that was a great example of it. And as you said with Luka, they definitely were willing to live with that approach where he's going to score his 30 plus, and they're okay with that. And actually, Joe Mazzulla talked about that, I think, during the very long break that the Celtics had before the finals, where he actually used those numbers as examples. He said, I forgot the exact assist count that he used. I think it was pretty hyperbolic. I could be completely wrong on the total, but I think he said, like, as long as Luka's not getting 30 and like 20 assists, if we hold him to like 4 or 5 and he's still getting his 30, then that's where we want to be. It could have been a lower than 20. It could have been like 15.
Yeah.
And I'm completely forgetting. We'll have to circle back on it. But basically, I think it was hyperbolic, obviously, to where, that's the type of game plan that they want to have. Obviously, he's not going to tell you how they're going to do it.
Sure.
But with Luka Doncic before the series mentioning, really spotlighting the cross matching that Boston, has done against them in the past. They should have expected this, because I think they did. The approaches that Boston used. So I think that's they're just going to have to settle into the series, get those adjustments, figure out the right spots to attack, all that good stuff, and do a lot of adjustments on the possibilities that we talked about as well too. So that's definitely a very impressive game 1 execution of the game plan for Boston. But yeah, definitely a lot to think about for game 2 for Dallas, because there's just a lot of factors that are compounding whenever you're giving up advantages in one part of the game that feed into others on both sides of the floor, especially.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on that is because, when you look at Boston and what they were able to do, not only the defense, that they played, I mean, the effort that you could tell that the experience for Boston was able to play itself out a little bit in this game 1 for them, based on the way that they were able to play. And I thought they did a really good job of weathering and playing in the moment and being able to really take advantage of that, because it felt like the Mavericks at times were just not there when it came to their execution and the way that they played. But, for the Mavericks, they've got to find a way to settle down into the series a little bit, find a way to be able to deal with the barrage that the Celtics are dealing, can present, and then be able to move forward from there. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves in an 0-2 hole in the series. But there's a lot of series left. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, they haven't lost back-to-back games since March the 5th. This is a team that's won every game 2 of this postseason so far. As you mentioned, they're going to have to lean into that quite a bit going into game 2 to find themselves getting a split before coming back to Dallas. But it was an impressive game 1 from Boston. They did exactly what they're capable of doing, and they did it quite well. And the Mavericks, I think, now have a chance to counterpunch and figure out a way to be able to get themselves back into this series going forward there. So it should be hopefully a really good game too. Now that the Mavericks kind of have an idea of what to expect from that Boston crowd, they felt it. They were able to kind of take it all in and hopefully now be able to absorb it, to be able to deal with it, because it's going to be, if they thought it was loud in game one before that game started, they're going to be in for a rude awakening for game two because it's going to be even louder. And Porzingis is feeling
when a shark smells blood in the water. That's how that one's going to be.
Yeah. And if you're Boston, I mean, Tatum didn't even play. He played okay. He was all right. He went 6 of 16 from the field, had 16 points, was a plus 19.
Well, they sure left them out there to get those numbers up, though. They
did. They did after. Yeah, because the Mavericks waved the white flag with 5 minutes left in the game. Doncic was already out of the game, and the Boston starters were still, in there with, a couple minutes, left in the game before they eventually took them out as well. So yeah, there was some of that, but I mean, I guess you can kind of do that when you've played the way that you played already in the first, 3+ quarters of the game to get you to that point. So looking forward to game two, though. This is kind of what the Mavericks do. They lose game one, but they find a way to climb themselves back into a series. They'll need to do that in game two. Grant, tell the folks they can find you and what you got going on, man.
Yeah, for sure. I have a couple articles already from that game one. We'll have plenty more as well, especially because the Mavericks are practicing tomorrow, Celtics as well. And the NBA Finals, they have like everyone wearing a Mavericks logo, talking every day when they do organized stuff. So everyone pretty much should be talking tomorrow. Sure, there'll be plenty from that. And you can find all that content on, si.com/NBA/Mavericks. I'll have, coverage throughout the playoffs on my YouTube channel. Just my name, Grant Afseth, AFSETH, where I have press conferences. And then I'm going to be doing some video breakdowns before game two as well. And more episodes on Inside the Mavs, and plenty of content on Kevin's Twitter account. And then also you can watch these episodes on his YouTube channel as well too.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of coverage here on Inside the Mavs to continue to have you covered throughout the NBA Finals. Grant is traveling with the NBA Finals. He is there in Boston, will be so for game two, obviously, before coming back to Dallas for games 3 and 4. So definitely subscribe to his channel on YouTube at Grant Afseth. He's got tremendous stuff and all kinds of coverage for the Mavericks as we continue the NBA Finals. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. Of course, I'm your Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Our pregame will begin on Sunday evening at 6:30 p.m. with game two tipping off at 7 p.m. with Chuck Cooperstein and Brian Damaris on the call for the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. We'll have plenty more of coverage throughout the weekend as the Mavericks get back on the practice floor on Saturday, and the Mavericks and Celtics will actually both be on the practice floor on Saturday ahead of game number 2 on Sunday. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, appreciate you joining us here for this episode on Inside the Mavs. For Grant, I'm Kevin. This has been Inside the Mavs presented by Aura.